This is Design Build Risk Management, Lesson 3, Documenting the Agreement Between the Parties. I'm Kent Holland with ConstructionRisk, LLC. The first case that I'm going to discuss is really the oldest of the cases. And this one is American Recycling versus County of Manatee. And in this particular case, AmeriCycle company had the best proposal for the design, construction, and operation of a waste composting facility. And it negotiated with the county for 18 months, but was never able to reach an agreement. So the county broke off the negotiations, rejected all proposals, and started again. The design builder sued the county, claiming that the county's public statements amounted to a contract award. The court denied the claim, saying that what was awarded was merely, quote, the right to negotiate, close quote, not a contract itself. Now, that is, of course, consistent with one of the recent Virginia cases dealing with teaming agreements, where the court said that the teaming agreement was merely an agreement to agree in the future. It was not an enforceable contract. Let's look at the battle of the forms. What terms govern when there doesn't appear to be a complete meeting of the minds on the form itself, but you have sort of two competing contract forms? On a City of Savannah parking garage project, the design builder and its engineering subconsultant litigated over what contract terms and conditions would apply to the contract between them. The engineer's letter proposal contained a scope of service and terms and conditions sheet. A purchase order was issued by the design builder, and it contained different terms and conditions, but it also referenced the engineer's proposal. Well, the question was, in referencing the engineer's proposal, was that as to the terms and conditions, or was that only as to the scope of services that the engineer proposed? Well, the court found that the purchase order by the contractor was the final form, because it was a counter offer, and the engineer never objected to it, but instead began its services. So that was a case of Babson Cook Company versus TRC Worldwide. Letters of intent. When are they enforceable? This is not a formal contract per se, but it is a letter of intent stating the parties intend to enter into a contract. And these agreements, these letters of intent, may have quite a few details. And that's what we're going to see from this next case, where the court found that the developer may be entitled, and this is a developer contractor, may be entitled to recover for the project owner's breach of contract on a letter of intent. The agreement was a letter of intent where the developer contractor expended a lot of time and cost in reliance on the letter of intent. But the deal ultimately fell apart before a final contract was executed for the design and construction of a new medical office building. Now, the letter of intent stated the following, quote, "Your acceptance of this new letter will constitute such authorization to initiate development and serve as the binding agreement between our two parties until a formal development agreement is executed," close quote. Now, the letter of intent stated that the developer contractor would own an interest in the building when it was completed, that it would design and build it, that it would receive fees for specified services rendered. The one thing that was clearly missing, however, was there were no remedies or liabilities specified in the letter of intent in the event that the project would be aborted or given by the owner to a different developer. After the letter of intent was signed, the owner decided that it really could not go through with the deal with this particular developer contractor, and therefore it ceased the arrangement. Well, the developer then sued the owner for breach of contract, and the owner moved for summary judgment, arguing there was no contract. All we had were unaccepted offers and counteroffers, never a true meeting of the minds. There was no enforceable contract, argued the owner. The court found that the letter of intent actually showed, in this case, that the parties intended to be bound by its terms, quote, at the moment of acceptance, before the negotiation of more formalized agreements, close quote. So it may have been intended as an interim agreement, but it was intended to be a binding agreement nonetheless. Responsibility for code compliance. Lesson 4 of Design Build Risk Management. This is a presentation by Ken Holland, ConstructionRisk, LLC. The question is, who is responsible for identifying and meeting legal codes, regulations, ordinances, things like Americans with Disabilities Act, Fair Housing Act, and other requirements of the building codes. In the case of Tips versus Heartland Developers, the court dealt with a matter involving an airplane hangar in San Antonio. The design builder here failed to meet the fire code requirements for a mezzanine, and the court stated that the contractor gives an implied warranty that codes will be met. And the court held, quote, contractors, not owners, are in the best position to know about and comply with relevant building codes. Furthermore, buyers are not in the business of building. They are in the business of occupying. They rely on builders to furnish structures that can be occupied, close quote. That is an interesting decision. It certainly gives a project owner some comfort in that it is, according to the court, entitled to rely upon its design build team to identify the relevant codes and comply with them, and that the owner, after all, is not necessarily a sophisticated project developer and may not know the codes and requirements as well as the design build team. A couple of things I'd like to point out. When I'm reviewing contracts from the designer point of view, I like to say that the designer will create its design, its plans and specs, consistent with the standard of care to comply with the laws, regulations, codes, etc., rather than suggesting that the design is warranted to meet all the codes and requirements. And the reason for that is that there is no insurance coverage for professional liability for the designer that would arise out of a warranty, whether implied or express, that the codes would be complied with. The point of saying that they'll meet the standard of care to do it is now we're subject to the negligence standard, and that it will be covered by insurance. Now, the contractor is dealt with differently, and so this court really focuses on the contractor and says the whole contractor as a design build team has created an implied warranty to the project owner that it will meet all codes and regulations. So this is something then to be dealt with between the contractor and the designer in their subcontract form as well. Differing site condition claims. Lesson 5 of Design Build Risk Management. First point here is that the same rules apply to differing site condition claims on design build projects as apply to all other types of projects. So you know the rules on design build projects, comply with the same when dealing with differing site conditions on design build. And that would be, you have type 1 differing site condition claims, which are going to be those that are conditions different from what the contract showed they should be. You have type 2 differing site conditions, which are different from what the reasonable contractor would have foreseen in the field, even if they are not addressed in the contract terms or documentation or geotech reports, etc. So let's look at a couple cases. First, a differing site condition claim was denied where the contractor claimed that he expected or suspected that there must be unexploded ordnances in the ground. The design builder was awarded a contract to remediate landfill on a military base in Italy, and it claimed entitlement to equitable adjustment for a differing site condition based on its suspicion that there might be unexploded ordnances present. Now, there was delay to its work due to the government not issuing what is called a, quote, war bombs reclamation certification, close quote. And the contractor kept insisting that it needed this, but the government was not really wanting or desirous of granting it. The Armed Services Board of Contract Appeals denied the appeal from a contracting officer rejection of the differing site condition claim. And the reasoning was that there was no unexploded ordnance actually found at the site, and the design builder did not prove that certification was legally required or that the government had any duty to evaluate the risk. The next case, the design builder was entitled to recover on a differing site condition based on conditions that were different from what were shown in the soil reports. On an underground parking garage project, the engineer, subcontractor of a design builder, incurred cost in redesigning the foundations due to soft clay differing from what was shown in the soil reports provided by the owner. The owner denied the design builder's claim, asserting that there was a failure to meet various procedural requirements such as affidavits that the subcontractors had been paid, but more importantly because the soil reports showed that there was clay. It just didn't show the exact type of clay. And so they said because it showed there was clay, there couldn't be a differing site condition claim based on clay. The design builder prevailed, and this was over $15 million plus $2 million in attorney's fees. The court held that the differing site condition could be found since the type and the amount of the clay could be deemed different from what was shown in the soil reports. In other words, not all clay is equal. Just because clay was shown doesn't mean that it was revealing that there were soft clay or clay lenses or weak clay. And the jury could find bad faith by the city against the contractor because the city, quote, rejected the contractor's materially different conditions claim simply because the soil reports had always indicated the presence of clay. The court said this ignored the provisions for differing site condition claims for site conditions that differed materially from the conditions indicated in the contract documents or from conditions ordinarily found to exist. Just because the method of project delivery is design-build doesn't mean that the government can treat the contractor differently and deny a differing site condition claim. It really doesn't change what is expected of the contractor during bid proposal. In the next case that we're going to talk about, Haskell Corporation, which is a Board of Contract Appeals case out of 2006, there was a technical spec that provided a government survey, and it stated that gravel material with certain grain sizes would be available on site for use by the design builder. The design builder increased quantity of the subgrade fill material as a result of errors in the government surveys. Due to high moisture content and frozen materials in stockpiled materials, the design builder had to use different screening processes, and this took longer and required the purchase of off-site borrow material. The government denied the change order and asserted that although the stockpile contained excess fines, the processing of the pile and the choices of screening procedures were the design builder's responsibilities, close quote. That was the argument of the government. The board held that the design builder was entitled to a type 1 differing site condition, that being the difference in the contractor's actual cost and what the cost would have been if the conditions had been as represented in the RFP. Now, unfortunately, there have been some recent decisions, and I am not going to get into the specifics of the case because I'm really hoping it's going to be reversed shortly in the Federal Circuit. But right now, the United States Court of Claims has issued a decision on another clay case where the government basically has disavowed reliance on the soil report that was provided to all the bidders during the proposal stage. And although the contractor actually encountered soil conditions differing from what was represented, the court held that because the government had used disclaimer language saying we are giving you this report but don't rely upon it, you are expected once you receive the contract to go out and do your own thorough investigation, the court said that was enough to basically disclaim reliance on that document, and therefore there could be no differing site condition claim. Now, that is a bad decision because logically you cannot expect a bidder at the proposal stage. You've got 8 different bidders who might bid on a project. The government's not going to allow them to all go out onto a military base and poke holes in the ground and do their own soil investigation, which after all took somebody else 6 months to do before the proposal ever even started. So the government is basically saying, yeah, you go out and do your own investigation, don't rely on ours, but they don't really expect you to do it. And the court, unfortunately, fell for that silly argument and allowed it to get through. And we're hoping that that gets reversed shortly, again, in the Federal Circuit Court when it reviews this. And that case has been briefed, and we will see what happens shortly. I will brief you again on the outcome. This concludes this segment of the lessons from Design Build Risk Management. Please join me for additional lessons. The contact information for myself and also the information for continuing education credit will be shown on the final slides. Thanks. See you again soon.